Hello again. It's just gone 23 minutes after 7. It's time for us to join Peter Ndoro. Now he's in Fourways for another one of our SABC TNA business briefings. This morning he's joined by Minister Malusi Gigaba, the Minister of Home Affairs, and they'll be discussing various issues including immigration and as well as development. So let's hear it from Peter himself. Peter, a very good morning to you.
A very good morning to you, Ayanda, and good morning to everybody at home. As Ayanda said, we're in Fourways today, just north of Johannesburg, and this is the venue for the latest in the series of New Age business briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today very kindly sponsored by Transnet. And Home Affairs is sharply in focus, and this is a department that affects every single person in South Africa in one form or another. In fact, from the moment you're born, pretty much the Department of Home Affairs has got you on their radar right until the day you die. So this is a conversation that we're all very much involved in, and it'll affect you one way or another. On the 26th of May 2014, the new immigration rules or amendments to the immigration rules came in. And we're going to be unpacking some of those during the course of this conversation, and we want you to be very much a part of this conversation. At Morning Live SABC, hashtag TNA BizBrief is our Twitter handle, where you can send your questions, perhaps raise some concerns. I have to say that one of the themes that we really want to unpack on this conversation today is immigration for development. And this is something that's come up in focus with the recent wave of xenophobic attacks. The question of migration has come through. And if you look around the world, people are moving around the world, and migration is something that the whole world has embraced. And so we need to kind of look at it from our point of view. What does it mean for us? What are the benefits for it? What are the challenges that we face with migration? And what does actually immigration for development mean for all of us? Well, the man to unpack some of these issues and your concerns is the Minister himself, the Minister of Home Affairs, the Honourable Malusi Gigaba, and he joins me now. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you in the programme. Thank you. Perhaps we can just start at the beginning. And 26th of May last year, these amendments came into being. And maybe if you could just give us the rationale for these changes and what they were meant to do, and then we can unpack some of them.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you, Peter, to our audience here, and to our audience at home and everywhere else on the continent. The new immigration regulations came into effect to address a number of issues. One, it was to streamline our regulations, to ensure that our regulations were clearer to understand and easier to implement for our officials, so that they know exactly what is it that they need to do in implementing them. The second thing, it was to harness migration for development. You see, if you look at some of the regulations that we introduced, for example, to take away the burden on people with corporate visas to have to want to be treated as family units with their families, to not to have to apply to renew their visas every 2 years, but to renew them once in 4 years. We were trying to ensure that people can focus on the things they have to do without the burden of having to keep going to the Department of Home Affairs for renewal. We also introduced a number of others, including around critical skills, that if you have a critical skill, you can apply for the critical skills visa 12 months before you even get a job and come to the country to look for the job, and to ensure that you are able to attract critical skills. But the third thing we were trying to do is to end a long legacy of abuse of our immigration regulations, where people would overstay deliberately and because they knew they were going to pay a fine if they had overstayed. Now, if you have dollars and euros and pounds, you easily overstayed maliciously and knew that you were going to pay a fine comparable to a rand, it's nothing, you'll get away with it. Now, the problem with it was that for a European visitor who had overstayed, they would pay these fines easily. But for an African immigrant who had overstayed, most likely they would then be declared undesirable. Now, we wanted to create parity so that the penalty for overstaying is the same, to remove that abuse by those who have more money. But at the same time, we wanted to ensure that, people who abuse our regulations can then be dealt with in terms of our law. And there are a number of issues we've had to deal with. And that's what was the purpose of these regulations, and we think that they've worked well. We were also intending to protect children with the requirement that children, if you are traveling with a child, they must be in possession of an unabridged birth certificate. If one parent is not traveling, the parent who is not traveling must provide a letter, an affidavit of consent. If you cannot get that, then there must be a court order. We were trying to protect children because at the end of the day, what type of parent would not be interested in the safety of their child while they are traveling? What type of parent would say to you that, oh no, it's okay if my child travels without my consent, without an unabridged birth certificate, without you knowing who the parents of this child are? We've dealt with all of those issues. Come the 1st of June, the requirement for an unabridged birth certificate is going to come into effect. And again, we've streamlined those regulations, the standard operating procedures. We have trained our officials and are continuing to train them so that they are able to implement all of this.
All right, so I'm going to come back to that particular issue because, it's created quite a bit of excitement. But I just want us to perhaps a little bit more on this immigration for development theme. What does it mean, and what difference is it going to make for South Africa?
For quite a long time, the discourse in South Africa on international migration has been very myopic. We've focused on the one hand on some hysteria about immigrants and migration. We've been discussing all the wrong and peripheral things around migration. And we've not focused on how can migration be harnessed in order to benefit South Africa in terms of development, security, nation building, and even integration, particularly in Africa, but in the international community as a whole. The concept of migration for development looks at what are the benefits of migration and what do we want from it. It puts us on the driving seat. We ask the question, what do we want to benefit from migration? Because you are not going to stop it. It's going to happen. It is happening. So what do we need to benefit from it, and how can we achieve those benefits? And we look at how does it benefit the South African economy. And that is where a number of issues come into effect about business investments, about corporate investments, about skilled migrants, about how do we keep contact with South African expatriates abroad. Because in quite a lot of times, we talk about migration as if South Africa doesn't send people abroad on the continent and in other countries in the world. And so we lose contact with them once they've left the country and they've gone somewhere. We don't harvest the international connections they are developing abroad. We don't harvest the resources which they are developing abroad and don't benefit from it. So the concept of migration for development assumes a proactive approach on our part to managing migration for the benefit of South Africa, so that we can know exactly what we are doing, and in the process we then develop mechanisms to manage the migration not only of asylum seekers but of economic migrants from the Southern African region or the African continent, and find ways to regulate that space too.
All right. Well, let's chat a little bit about that, because migration is one of the tensions that we saw recently in the xenophobic attacks that took place. And I'm just wondering where we're at with that. Do we know how many people are coming in and out of the country? Do we have statistics? Do we know how many people are illegal? How are we managing it? How did we get to a situation where we have this anti-foreign sentiment that plays out periodically in South Africa?
The Department of Home Affairs has evolved a great deal since 1994, because when South Africa got liberated, a number of African nationals began moving into and out of South Africa, but that wasn't the first time. You will remember that even prior to that, a lot of Basotho, Mozambicans, Botswana, and even Swazis were moving in and out of the country, some because of kinship relations. Remember that the borders that we have are colonial borders. They were imposed on us, not by us, but by the colonial system before us. But at the same time, you know, during the heydays of apartheid, migrant labor was recruited through TEPA from our neighboring countries in order to come and work in South African mines. And so Southern Africans have already been contributing positively towards the development of the South African economy, and at the same time, they have been accumulating resources which they send back home as remittances in order to help sustain their families and support their families abroad. In the process, what happened, particularly during the apartheid system, many of the miners who came to live and work on our mines, or maybe some of them from our neighboring states and from elsewhere, from the Bantustans within South Africa, they came to stay here. That broke families, it separated families apart, and created a whole lot of difficulties. What we are now trying to do, as we have seen over the last few years, is to develop better ways to manage migration. And we have evolved, as I'm saying. Right now, we do have the electronic movement control system at our ports of entry, which enables us to know how many people have come in and out of the country. We are working together with the South African National Defence Force around the borders to manage the borderline. We are not where we would want to be. And that's why the establishment of the Border Management Agency, whilst it will not be a panacea for all the problems, but will be a crucial intervention in managing South Africa's land, maritime and air borderline. We are going to be launching an Operation Pyramid in the next few weeks to enhance our land border management and to integrate our border management activities along all our borders. We have a sense, we know how many people enter and leave the country. We know how many immigrants are in the country. The numbers are always blown out of proportion when you engage, when you read the media. But we are assisted in that process by Statistics South Africa, which in 2011 did a survey of how many immigrants were in the country. And we are quite satisfied that with the systems that we have put in, we will manage that system even better. And as you know, the department continues to repatriate those immigrants that are undocumented in the country. We know the numbers of asylum seekers and refugees that are in South Africa. And so we are quite in control of our migration management. The challenge for us is to communicate more and engage the public more in the management of migration and ensure that we establish necessary credibility for our migration management systems so that South Africans have a sense that when we say we are managing the system, we actually are doing that. And that would mean, amongst others, eliminating fraud and corruption within the department, which is an ongoing practice on our part, so that nobody fraudulently obtain South African documents. Because once we do that, we then put at risk every genuine immigrant in South Africa because of the reckless activities of a few officials and a few immigrants.
All right, talking about risk to immigrants, we saw this wave of xenophobic attacks in the last few weeks. 2008 was another sad chapter, but this kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. It builds up over a period of time. I'm just wondering, did we not have our eye on the ball to see the trends, the attitudes, and maybe even incidents that hadn't fully blown up yet that led us to 2008 and led us to 2015?
Any country has to watch out for xenophobic sentiments in its society and for outbreak of violence in society related to immigrants. We are not an exception. It happens in many countries. It has happened in the past on the continent. It happens in other parts of the continent. We are not an exception. We are not unique. And we shouldn't think like that. But secondly, in other countries in Europe, they're grappling with these difficult issues. Political parties win elections in Europe based on xenophobia, on their dislike policies for immigrants. And they go ahead to win elections. They promise to be tight on immigration, and that becomes the basis of their campaigns right until they win elections. We're not there as South Africa. South Africans, the overwhelming majority of South Africans are not xenophobic. They live peacefully with immigrants. When we announce the winners of the South African Migrants Awards, the Integrated Community Awards, you will hear amazing stories of how South Africans are integrating with immigrants and living peacefully with them and assisting them along the way. You will hear beautiful stories of the role of immigrants in South Africa to contribute towards our society. And so the majority of South Africans are not xenophobic. But the problems sometimes arise. Now, let's take a practical examples. A South African guy breaks into a shop of an immigrant. The immigrant defends his shop like any shop owner or property owner would do. If you broke into my house, I would defend myself, whether by shooting or in any other way. And once this immigrant shop owner shoots against this South African guy who is breaking into his shop, the community responds by punishing collectively all immigrants in the area. The start of this was not xenophobic, it was crime. The response of the community was xenophobic, because instead of going to the shop owner to say, but what happened? They then, without asking what happened, they punish an entire community of immigrants in the area and chase them out. And you have a number of similar instances which may start as criminal activities, two people fighting over something, spills out into xenophobic violence. So you need to continuously watch out, because there are always people who would opportunistically use whatever occasion there is in order to achieve goals and ends which are not, which will not benefit the country, which are going to embarrass the country. And we need to continuously talk to South Africans about the rights and responsibilities of immigrants, and we need to continuously talk to immigrants about the rights and their rights and responsibilities in South Africa. One of the mistakes that we have made, and one of the glaring mistakes in our migration management, is that up until recently we've not been managing it. It's been happening on its own. All we do is to put up laws and regulations to just deal with it, and in some instances we deal with it as if we don't like it. But what we now need to do is an overhaul of our paradigm towards management, so that we engage government as a whole, all tiers of government, We engage communities in the management of migration, and the integration process of migrants doesn't happen ad hocly, but it becomes a process that is managed and dealt with consciously. Because at the end of the day, migration is not about the phenomenon. It's not an academic exercise. It's about people. It's about people who move into your country. At the center of migration are human beings. And that integration, their rights and responsibilities must therefore be dealt with not as systems, processes, and phenomena, but as people. And you ensure that their living amongst you becomes a conscious exercise that you can account for, because at the end of the day, you want them to be safe whilst living in your country.
All right, so we're going to have to pause for thought, but you've raised a few issues that we'd like to explore a little bit later on. The treatment of people, whether they're immigrants or otherwise. Operation Fiela is something that's come into sharp focus as well. And we're going to take a break. And after that, we're going to start exploring as well these migrant awards. What do they mean? Are they a good thing? What are your thoughts? Hashtag TNA BizBrief at Morning Live SABC. And I'm also going to introduce two more panelists that are going to help us with this conversation. So stay with us for that and more.